Okay, Kingsley, we are into another video in our Starting Up a Business video series. Let's talk today about going into business with someone else. We do see this happening a bit where people go and they go into business with their friends. And we are talking about someone other than a spouse, a partner, a loved one. We're talking about friends, other business partners, those sorts of things. So what do we need to look for?
I guess that the key things here, Lou, in a sense that, of course, if it's with your spouse, then, of course, there's a sense of, well, we're in it together anyway, good, bad, or otherwise. If this works or fails, the consequences come to both of us sort of thing, versus when you're involving others where, you know, that brings in a whole new dynamic. And I guess it sort of depends a little bit, again, on the scale of what you're going to kick off at. But depending on what you're doing, there's the added dangers of, and particularly, you know, and we'll talk about this in one of the other videos of what structure you choose to use. But if we take the worst case of a partnership, where so I've decided to go into business with Bill Bloggs, and Bill Bloggs does something dumb and stupid, there's a real possibility that it could be me who gets sued, and they could potentially say, oh, it's easier to get the money off Kingsley than what it is off Bill Bloggs. We'll attack Kingsley to get that money, even though he didn't do the stuff up, and then it'll be up to Kingsley to try and get his share off Bill Bloggs later in the piece. So you've got the risk element of it, and then, of course, there is the just getting along with each other. So obviously you choose people that, certainly at the front end of the story, you get along well with and think you can work with. But the general advice I tell people in that situation is set it up as though you don't really know who they are, and get the rules established at the front end on that basis. So you would typically find, and probably if you're going to do this, you're probably going to be at a company or maybe a unit trust thing. So you would have what's called a shareholders agreement or a unit trust holders agreement, where you put in all the rules, particularly around things like, well, what do we do if we have a disagreement? You know, let's say you and I go into a business, Lou, and I think we should buy red pens and you think we should buy blue pens. How do we resolve these issues? If it turns out that I want to sell out, how do we deal with that? If one of us gets ill and can't work anymore, how do we deal with that? And so we think about all of these various issues and risks at the front end and have a mechanism in place to deal with that before it happens. And that's also very useful in terms of the other mistake I see people make here is, so you and I go into business, Lou, and we know each other pretty well. I think, well, that's fine. I know Lou, she knows me. Business grows, and now we want to introduce Bob, who we don't today even know. We don't even know Bob. We bring Bob in 3 years' time. It's much, much better that we've still established all those rules on those issues before we bring Bob in. So when it happens, we don't sort of have to quick, we need to get a bit of a rule in and say how we're going to deal with Bob, but we didn't really agree this with Bob before he came in. It's all there in the front end. The other issue, of course, you can have, and things can be done about this, is in terms of one of us dies or falls under the proverbial bus or something, and now my interest in the business has been inherited by my wife. How do we deal with that? You may or may not be happy to work with my wife, and things can be done about that again in advance. There's some special contracts that can be done to deal with that. Again, that needs to be done before it happens, and hopefully most of these things don't happen. But it is so much better if they've been dealt with beforehand. So it's thinking these things through, having the agreements in place at the front end. Now, and these agreements exist already, and you don't have to try and dream up every issue. If you speak to a lawyer, they typically have a bit of a template document to start with. And so if you and I, Lou, we could go through and say, well, these 10 issues, yeah, they look to all apply to our situation, but we've got 2 other extra ones we can bring in, and there's 4 on the list that the lawyer's given us that don't apply to us. We can take those out if we choose, and then sign off an agreement, and we've got certainty on all these issues. As I say, hopefully most don't happen, but that does help. The other thing, again, which we'll talk a little bit in one of the other ones we're talking about on the tax side, is there's probably a little bit of an advantage with companies too, where they will have paid a lot of the tax at the company level. Some of the other structures have the problem that you and I go into business, Lou, and we get our share of the profits. And you're a very good money manager and I'm a hopeless one. And then I get my tax bill, it's $30,000. I haven't planned for it. You planned for yours. And so I'm coming back and say, oh, well, you know, I need another 30 grand to come out of the business. And you're thinking, well, hang on, we can't really afford to pay another 30 grand out of it. So there's a few other things, and which we'll talk about in the one we're going to talk about with the tax structures.
So
well.
when setting up a business with someone other than your spouse, and even maybe with your spouse, is having those contracts in place, seeking legal advice. You know, we would recommend that you go and see HHG Legal to sort all of those things out and plan for the worst. Plan for the worst. Come up with every possible scenario of bad things that can happen and plan for it.
Yeah, I guess even to segue off that and going back to, in a sense that from yours and my point of view, look, is I think people don't want to do that. They feel, oh, I feel bad about raising this with Lou, who I get along well with. But that goes back to the point, well, think about the fact that Bob might come along in 3 years' time. So don't personalise it. So I mustn't personalise this about being about you and you about me. Treat it as though there's some unknown stranger coming into it in 3 years' time. And that's how you draft these things up.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much, Kingsley.
Thank you, Lou.